Hello and welcome everyone to the final workshop of our fall edition, part one. My name is Lily Kilby. I'm one of the Love Yourself Project team members. I'm here to introduce to you today Annabel Kaye. Annabel has spent 40 years helping grow businesses sort out the practical and legal side of paying people. In 2009, she got really interested in the gig economy and how flexible working and outsourcing could work or hurt. She has spent the last few years helping businesses get real value from the people they pay and filling the gaps that most entrepreneurs leave wide open for trouble. Without further ado, Annabel, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm hoping now that I'm going to share the right screen. My technical genius is unlimited, in terms of getting these things wrong, but I think I'm going to share the right screen. So let me know if you're not now seeing a blank screen that's about to do something. There we are. And there it is. So this is my subject, and it's a subject I feel really strongly about because for most of us, we get started either on our own or with friends and family. And I'll be really grateful if you're interested, if you let me know in the chat who you're collaborating with at the moment. And whether that's, obviously you've got to collaborate with customers, but is it friends and family? Is it people you pay? Is it employees? What kind of people is it? Because at some point in your business journey, you have to get beyond it's me in my own head doing my own thing, and you've got to get some kind of business relationships going. And I'm celebrating 40 years in business this year, and this I have learned. There is normally a surprising gap between your plan for what you think is going to happen in business relationships and their plan. And I don't know how often any of you might have checked what the other people's plans are, but you will be surprised how often what you assume is what's going to happen, like today, is not at all what's going to happen. And obviously one of us has had a time zone change, and these things do happen. So it's really important when you're looking to work with clients, looking to work with an outsourced team or even employees, to look at what are the things you've got in common. Now, I see people in startup business zones all the time. I was chatting to one last week, and she was saying, well, I don't need to bother about this because they just want to be my client. And it turned out that the two of them had absolutely nothing in common. They had each completely misunderstood what service was on offer, what it cost, what the values of the business were, and it took them 4 days to start arguing. So it's really worthwhile checking that you've got some key aims and objectives in common when you start engaging other people in your business process. And understandably, if you've got the right things in common, you go ahead. And if you don't, hard as it is, because we all want to do every deal, we want to work with every person, we want to do everything, learn to say no. Learn to listen to your gut, listen to the information you're getting. Do not feel compelled to be all things to all people. If I could communicate one thing about getting other people engaged in your business process, that will be the thing. Feel free to say no. Because the number of times I've got into a business relationship with someone, thought, well, this isn't really it. It feels a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not totally happy with it. Ignored that feeling. Thought, don't be daft, don't be neurotic. You can't adore everyone you work with. Life's not like that. And something has gone wrong that's cost me serious time and money. If I had 40 years in business all over again, I would have listened to that stop sign every single time, and I would have 10 times the money today, and I would be doing this not from the top of Bodmin Moor, but from a beach on a desert island. So it makes a massive difference. So what are the types of clarity you need? You need to be really clear when money is involved. You may think, and I do it on my website, I publish a price list. People ask me if I want to do something, and for a long time I used to go, sure, I'll do it. And then I'd send them a bill, and they would go, what? And similarly, I'd work with associates and I'd say, can you do this project? And in my mind, it would be $250 or whatever. And then I'd get a bill for $500, because each of us just assumed that the other person understood what was included and what was extra. So with clients, it can be really, really disruptive. Now, things are different across the world, I know, but some things remain fairly constant. And there was a survey done in the UK about 10 years ago with small businesses in the service sector. And they discovered that on average, the typical small business left £6,000, which is not $6,000, but that order of magnitude, on the table every year of time and services that they hadn't billed because they felt a bit embarrassed. Maybe the customer wasn't expecting it. Maybe they hadn't been that clear. And so the business owner had done that work for free, even though it's what we do for a living. Now, I don't know about you, my business is fairly well established, but if I was doing $6,000 a year's worth of free work, I would very quickly get tired and start to go broke. That's a lot of money to be leaving on the table, but it is an average. And when I work with entrepreneurs, I find that that number varies in practice from about $1,000 a year to nearer to 40. So you need to be really, really, really clear with your clients when money is involved about what is extra, what is included, how many drafts, how many revisions, how many times will you fix this? What if the client goes mad and does something stupid? Whose responsibility is it? And when it comes to your suppliers in the modern world, you need to adopt the same practice. How often have you bought something, even something online, that you thought you had lifetime access to, only to discover that it was 6 months or nothing of the sort? You need to be really clear when you're buying what is extra and how long it lasts for. And nowhere is this a bigger problem than with gig economy workers. The great advantage we have with this wonderful technology is you can sit in your back bedroom or your camper van and you can work with someone in the Philippines, someone in India, someone in France, someone in London, someone in New York. But all of these people have a different backpack of ideas about what's normal. And I call it a backpack because they just carry it around and they go, everybody knows all business is done in dollars. Everybody knows all business is done in pounds. Everybody knows that in my industry, this is extra. Everybody knows in my industry, this is fully included. So if you don't start to get really clear with the people you pay about what's included and what's extra, either you will pay them a great deal more money than you expected, or get less, or they will get really frustrated and be one of those businesses charging $6,000 a year less than they really need to charge. Why should you care as a customer? Because if they're good at what they do, when you go back to get more of it from them, they won't be there anymore. If we are too aggressive in trying to exploit other people's weaknesses, we find ourselves either unable to deal with them because they're not in business anymore, or worse still, they are still in business, but they won't deal with us anymore. So it's really important to be clear when you are working in that space. And similarly, when you are working with employees, for those of you who go on to do that, you will find that you need to be just as clear about what you're expecting them to do in every aspect of how they work for you. So it's really important in all areas of your business life. To do that, you need to have a plan about how you're going to work with people. What are you going to give them? What are they going to supply? What are you going to supply? What do they need to do their job, their role, carry out those activities? What do you need to do if you're doing that? But here's the thing we never plan for. When you have a business relationship with someone, it will end. Even if you have the perfect business relationship and you and they are in business for the whole of your lives, one of you will die. All business relationships have an ending. And the one thing that nobody ever plans for, and you need to sort this out at a very early stage, is what happens when this relationship ends. Think about it. You've paid someone to provide you with something. When that contract ends, do you want to own the rights to use it over and over and over again? Or were they thinking that they sold it to you to use as long as you were their customer? Who do you want to own the intellectual property in what was created if you want to sell it on? Who do you want to own any residual rights? The thing I know about business relationships, and in 40 years I've had more than my fair share, is the best time to plan your breakup is at the beginning. Because at the beginning of a business relationship, you're normally on very good terms with each other. I don't want to disappoint you, ladies, but it's not always the case at the end. And if you can't agree at the beginning, when you're all very keen to get going, how this is going to end, you are never going to be able to agree how it's going to end when you've fallen out. And a lot of really good and positive business relationships don't end well. There's all sorts of reasons for that, but it's like assuming that everyone you date will be your best friend after your breakup. It's not how it works in practice. So you really do need to have a plan for your ending from the very beginning. This should be part of your strategy for involving other people in your business from the off. Does that make sense to you?
Totally, yes.
Yep. So
Yes.
it's one of the areas, it's not just expectations about this is my business model, which is one thing. The other area is the law. I can sit here with my little remote fastness today thinking the law in England and Cornwall applies to what I'm doing. But you're not in England and Cornwall, are you? So why should that automatically apply to what we're doing? You need to start bottoming that out as a micropreneur at a much earlier stage than you used to. When I founded this business in the 1980s, only really big corporates traded globally. Tiny businesses bought from the town or the village that they lived and traded in. So by the time you were trading globally, you had a legal department, a finance department, all these things. Now you can be doing this on your own without the backup of any of that knowledge, any of that information. And we tend to think somehow that none of this applies to us. We're almost too small to count. But it can come back and bite us in all sorts of ways. So think about, what are your expectations, and what legal system do you think is going to apply when things end? What do you assume? And what do you think they assume for a moment? If they're sitting there in France or Spain or the Philippines, are they thinking this is going to be French or Spanish or Philippine law that applies if things go wrong? Or has no one thought about it at all? Which is a perfectly reasonable thing, by the way, because we're all optimists when we're in business. We love starting things, but we're not so keen on ending them. One of the things that will help you navigate a business relationship from the beginning to the end is to set clear boundaries. The first one is workspace. Now that many of us live and work at home, some of the time, if not all of the time, it's very, very easy to set no boundaries for how you work. This means you have clients getting hold of you at 3 in the morning or over the weekend, and you may have gig economy workers trying to get you to sign off things at times when you don't normally work. Again, we get so caught up in the here and now of projects that we don't think about what is it that we've agreed to do. Be very careful to set time availability with people. And as I've learned today, make sure you're in the right time zone. Think about what it's like for you and them if your main contact is always at 3 in the morning. How is that going to be efficient going forward? One of the things I look very much for with my own outsourced team is whether I positively want them to be working a different time to me. For example, the people who maintain my website are in Australia. I'm in the UK. This means their day is my night, which means they take my website down when I and the majority of my customers are asleep. This is a positive decision. But if my diary VA worked in Australia, she and I would never be able to ping pong between us what we're doing without one of us being up all night. So it's not a good idea to have a diary manager in a different time zone to you, unless you have got a lot of business in a particular time zone and you want them to be awake when you are sleeping and taking care of all of that. But set clear boundaries, otherwise you will find you never get a minute when you're off work. Now, I'm being gently nagged about doing this today, actually, because it is in the middle of some leave, but I promised I'd do it and I wanted to do it. But I'm not doing anything else while I'm travelling. Anyone else gets an out of office email from me and that's it. Because otherwise you will end up too exhausted to cope with the business you've got right at the moment when it actually starts to make you money, which is really sad. I think more small businesses fail because the owner gets overwhelmed and exhausted than fail because there's no business for us or there's no viable business model. And this too is something I've observed. A lot of people go back to employed roles simply because they're exhausted. And I don't blame them. The other thing you need to be absolutely clear about when you are involving other people in your business is non-disclosure agreements, which I'll put up here as NDAs because that's an awfully long heading. That you would assume, if you're a nice person, that when you pay people to do things for you, they will keep your trade secrets, your customer list, what's going on in your business secret automatically as part of being a professional. But nothing can be further from the truth. One of the great advantages of writing down and contracting for a non-disclosure agreement is it forces the two of you to have a conversation about what is secret and what is not. And by getting someone to sign something, not everyone will follow what they sign. You've signaled very clearly to the honest people, these are more boundaries that I'm setting with you. An awful lot of people will start working with someone and show them the inner secrets of their business without the simplest piece of paper between you. This also can seem like a great idea when you're raring to go, but in the last 3 months, I have dealt with people who have let their marketing outsource team have primary access to all their material. And when they split up, they found themselves locked out of their own website and their own email marketing campaigns. This should never happen. And one of the ways to prevent it, but not the only one, is proper contracting, including non-disclosure agreements. Compliance is something that affects us as micropreneurs. We tend to think that all these laws apply to really big companies, but if you are working with an organisation larger than you, they will expect you to be capable of complying with the laws and standards applied to them, insofar as your role is getting entangled with that. You can't just expect to say, I'm a tiny thing and none of this applies to me. In many countries in the world, there are general small business exemptions, but in other countries there are not. And I come from the UK where there are definitely not. And I do realise that this is a variable thing across the world. But don't assume if you're in a jurisdiction where small businesses are exempt from certain kinds of compliance, that this will automatically apply to you if you're paying someone or working with someone in a country other than your own, because the laws across the globe vary, just as time zones do. One of the questions that you need to address is what jurisdiction, what country do you want your contracts to be enforced in if something goes wrong? There are many jurisdictions, civil jurisdictions, where you can contract for that to be the case. For example, you can contract to have contracts dealt with in the UK, even though you're not a British business or directly connected with it. You can also, and I know for American customers, very many incorporate in the state of Delaware because they find business law in Delaware is much more friendly to them than it is in, say, Iowa or California. So you need to think about where do you want your contracts to be enforced, because it can make a difference when things go wrong. And the other thing you really need to think about is tax. we tend to think if I invoice someone at the other end of the planet or they invoice me, we just pay each other and that's the end of it. But if you're in America, the IRS expects you to withhold tax from people who are providing services to you from overseas unless the right exemptions apply. This is similar in many jurisdictions. It's not quite that simple as, oh, it's all virtual and it doesn't count. And as all of our governments struggle increasingly for cash for fairly obvious reasons, they are getting more and more prone to look at the service sector as a source of revenue, whereas historically they've been very much more focused on goods, because when a lorry comes in through a port, you can check it. Whereas if I write something for you on the internet or you write something for me, it's much harder to check. But they are finding their way. So don't assume that the way tax works where you are is the right way to deal with the person you pay where they are. Now, this is where I want you to have a look at the download that I sent you in the group here, which I didn't put up on this slide because I couldn't make it do it. Because I want to go through with you what the questions are there, and for you to fill in your answers yourself. So if you haven't downloaded it already, let me know, and I'm going to turn off the share for a moment, and hopefully you can let me know whether or not you've successfully managed to get your download.
Yeah, I have. It's Rosie speaking.
Good, thank you, Rosie. So this is something that you're going to want to work through when you start to pay other people or when you take on a client. If you don't have an existing standard contracting system for you, so this is designed for you to take away and fill in. But do you have a particular person in mind, Rosie, that you're about to contract with?
For me, it's gonna be I personally, individually, not really, but I can think of someone. Like
Yeah.
I have like someone on mind. Yeah.
Okay. So do you have any clients, Rosie?
Not yet.
Not yet. So you're really, really getting started. Well done
Yeah.
you. Well done you. So what kind of business are you in?
So I'm aiming to provide social media marketing help. So
Brilliant.
as a digital marketing strategist and social media manager.
Brilliant. So let's have a look about how this would apply to you as someone providing services. So the first question is really about what your business structure is. Rosie, are you trading in your name or do you have a company? So the answer to the first question is you.
Well, I have a business name, but I would be a sole trader.
Yeah. So that means, of course, that there's nothing between you and as it were, the marketplace if something goes wrong. Not that it should, but you never do know. So where are you located?
Currently, I'm in Dublin.
Oh, how lovely.
But I sometimes am in Spain, and I quite like the idea of being how are they called?
Digital nomad?
Digital nomad, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously you'd fill in Dublin and Spain and question mark anywhere in the world.
Okay.
Well, it was come over to Cornwall. You'll love it one of these days, right? So what's your normal working pattern? Are you someone who works Monday to Friday, 9 through 5, or are you a late night person? Do you like to work the weekends? What's your core sort of regular pattern for what works for you?
Yeah, I'm aiming to keep Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. Yeah.
So it's really important that your customers, never mind your suppliers, know that, because there's a whole subsection of social media managers who are sort of working mums, and they do all their work in the evenings and at the weekends. So when you talk about who assumes what, you're actually assuming different things. So it's really important that you make it plain to your customers that you're not in that group.
I see.
Yeah, because
Mhm.
it's really weird. I've got outsourced teams in both groups, and I actually have to keep a list of who I have to get hold of in the evening, who I have to get hold of in the daytime.
Yeah, I see. That's a very good point.
Yeah, and so obviously it'd be really helpful if people had your contact information, including a website, etc., so they know how to reach you.
Sure.
So when you're actually dealing with a particular person, then obviously you'd want similar details about them.
Yeah.
Um, one of the biggest problems I see with micropreneurs is because we don't check out who's got a company and who's just got a business. We often contract into thin air with organizations that don't exist.
Mm,
Think about it. So supposing you decided that I had a business called Annabel Kaye Limited, which I don't, just to
yeah.
avoid confusion, and you thought, oh, I'm doing some work with Annabel, so I'll issue a contract with Annabel Kaye Limited.
Mm-hmm.
And then I never paid you. Not that I
I
wouldn't, but
yeah.
somebody won't. You go to sue me and say Annabel Kaye Limited owes me some money, and you get back no such business.
I see. Yeah.
So you need to go through a similar process with the people that you are going to have as customers, just as you would with the people that you are going to have providing you. And one of the things you need to do is figure out both sides of that equation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, and it's easy to forget. I've a dear friend and mentor. He's a great user of virtual assistants. And about 10 years ago, we shared a VA, and I thought she was brilliant, and he thought she was terrible. And he was very
Wow.
vocal about it. And he said to me, I don't understand what's wrong with this woman. I run a lot of evening networking events. And whenever people are going to the venue, do you remember those days when we were actually allowed out?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're all lost and going, where are we going? What are the directions? She never picks up the phone. I knew for a fact that the entire reason why she was a virtual assistant was she had school-aged children. So guess what she was doing between 4 in the afternoon and 7 in the evening?
With her kids, she was.
Yeah. Now, they had never had the conversation about availability.
Mm,
He had assumed that she would be available between 4 and 7, which was a core time for him when people were getting lost. And she assumed, I've organised the event to start at 8 in the evening. Everyone's got directions. I can go and pick up the kids from school.
oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he parted ways with that VA, but the misunderstanding cost her business a lot of reputational damage because he was out there going, she's rubbish. She doesn't do the job well.
Yeah, that's so unfortunate because it's like a tiny bit of communication, right?
Yes, but it's the little ones that
Mm-hmm.
undo us.
Mm-hmm.
So that would take you to what needs to be done. That is a big piece of miscommunication. Now, I work with a lot of social media managers because we do global and UK only social media manager contracts. And one of the biggest problems social media managers have when contracting with customers is the customer doesn't know what needs to be done to run a successful social media campaign.
Yeah,
Think about
that
it. If
makes
they knew
sense.
that, they wouldn't need a social media manager, would they? So
Yeah.
when I talk to social media managers, they say to me, the customer insists on seeing everything before it goes out, but then they don't get it back to me in time. They don't understand that I schedule days or weeks ahead because I've got multiple clients and I'm not just sitting there at 4 o'clock every evening waiting to personally upload their posts.
Oh yeah.
The
Exactly.
customer says, I've no idea what the problem is. The campaign's not due out till next week. Why are they hassling me now to sign off on the copy?
Because they are trying to
Yeah.
work
So
ahead. Yeah.
yes. So because customers see social media as something instant, and most people I know who work in the social media sector plan and schedule ahead, there are a lot of conflicts about when things need to be done.
Yeah.
So it's really good to get that clear with customers from the off about what your turnaround times are, what are their turnaround times. Do they need to sign off on everything, or once you've got sort of settled with each other, can you just schedule it all and they can have a look and maybe pull back what they're not happy with? How does it work?
Exactly.
Because you will find yourself with customers who will make themselves late and then complain that you haven't done it on time.
Exactly.
The
And
other
then,
thing that's a big problem with social media managers, by the way, is what you do about holidays. Because if you're
oh yeah,
pre-scheduling, you think, well, I'll just schedule for over my holiday. But they're thinking they can get you 365 days a year.
oh yes. And also if, okay, I scheduled something on my holiday, over my holiday, but what if something goes wrong? Am I supposed to check it, or
Yes,
yeah,
you need to think about that, because if you need active management, you may have to have an associate of your own that keeps an eye on things when you're gone, when you're established and
exactly.
able to pay them. In which case, there are all sorts of implications for that. But the biggest thing we had this year with social media managers is we had a lot of pre-scheduled, come to my venue, wear a great wedding event, come to this concert, and of course they were all cancelled.
Mm-hmm.
And there were loads and loads of pre-scheduled posts. There were loads and loads of social media managers on beaches, oblivious to the fact that their clients were going spare.
Yeah,
So you have to expect the unexpected, even in a scheduled world.
absolutely.
I mean, I don't think anyone expected this, but I don't think that will be the last time in your lifetime when something unexpected will happen.
Exactly.
So it's a really good idea to think about, what is the expectation if something happens? What if the venue burns down? Not that I'm wishing that on anyone. Whose job is it to urgently pull the pre-programmed?
Promotions, yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
because life never goes according to plan, as I am
Exactly.
ably demonstrating today by starting late.
That's
Yeah.
okay.
So timetables and communications, another one. Quite often we know when a project's due to start, but we don't define when it's due to end.
That's true.
And we don't like to, because we're kind of afraid, particularly with a customer, that if we say when it ends, then we won't have any more business after that.
Yeah,
But actually, you can have a completion date and then start another bit of a project and go on. But it's very good discipline for you, because small businesses suffer from feast and famine. We sell and we sell and we sell and we sell till we get business. Then we get too busy and we stop selling. And because we always imagine that all our current projects will never end, even though all projects end, we don't start selling again until the client tells us what the end date is.
exactly.
And that means we don't have any pipeline.
Mm.
So,
And also, I personally would be worried a bit that, okay, we send the end date, but what if we run over it? You know,
well,
what if
that's why we have
don't?
key dates, milestones and key dates is
Mm-hmm.
something we can track for a lot, because a long project might have 5 or 6 key dates that need to be met to meet the end date.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, if you've missed date 1 and date 2 and date 3, you've got a pretty good idea you're going to miss date 6, haven't you?
Yeah,
But if you hit dates 1, 2 and 3, you've got a reasonable chance of hitting 6. So I'm a great believer in not just having a start date and a finish date, but key milestone dates in the middle,
yeah, absolutely.
because it allows you to assess. So for example, if you're taking on a new social media customer, you might do a lot of research and planning, and the first date would be the end of that phase before you've even posted a thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then you might go back to them with, these are your hashtags, these are your keywords, these are the images I'd like to use, this is the thing. Now we've got some key events coming up, I'd like to do some test posts for those events, and maybe your stage 2 would be the end of that. And then when they're happy, you might move into 4 or 5 key events in the year that you're working around.
Oh, yes.
I mean, not everybody does that. Some people have got ongoing, it never ends. But you need to know, because if you're always running late with this client, you're going to be always late with them, aren't you?
Oh, yeah.
But you may have other clients, because if you're in business, you very rarely can manage with just one client.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Now, one of the things that drives me mad when I use outsourced suppliers is I am generally a control freak about time and deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
So I normally go mad if the stuff I have runs late. And because of that, I put it in early. But
Mm-hmm.
many people who work with me shunt my work because the other person's work came in late and they want to do mine at the last minute because then they can fit both in. I find this very stressful because I put my stuff in early because I didn't want it done at the last minute.
But you still end up with the
Well, I
last minute.
change suppliers, to be honest. I mean, I
Okay.
accept that once or twice that happens, but if it becomes a pattern, I swap.
Mhm.
Because I don't see why I should have the stress of everything being at the last minute when I've done it in time.
Yeah.
So you have to have a strategy for how you're going to juggle different clients or suppliers, for that matter, with different ideas of time. Now, lovely, with a name like Rosie Ignace, and you
Yeah.
obviously Spanish, and you're living in Dublin.
I'm actually Hungarian.
Hungarian. Oh, that's
Yeah.
an unusual.
Yeah.
Right. But you spend time in Spain. You
Yeah.
will know then that there are completely different notions of time at the heart of those
Definitely.
cultures, right? So if some people work absolutely to time as a matter of routine, other people, that time and that deadline means don't do it before that date, but it doesn't mean to them do it on that date. So if you're going to, it's like herding cats. If you're going to have 4 clients and they've all got a very different idea of time, you have to straighten it out with them.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and it's odd because we don't do it because we all assume that our notion of time is everybody's.
Exactly.
So it's really worthwhile bottoming out what's your notion of time and what wiggle room will you build in. For example, I always tell my outsourced team I need something about 4 days ahead of when I need it because there's always one that's late. And I've given up having nervous breakdowns and high blood pressure. I just schedule the wiggle time in now, but I don't tell them because then they'll be even later.
Yeah. That's a smart thing to do.
Yeah. So the other thing is I think you need to think about when you're contracting as a social media manager, but it applies to everyone, is what must you have to make this contract work? Does that make sense?
Yes.
What equipment, what information, who's providing the images, what is it that you need to do your job? And it's must, not wouldn't be nice.
Yeah.
Because if you don't make it plain what you need, you're not going to be able to do your job, and your client will blame you, by the way, because they won't know.
Exactly.
Yeah? And similarly, the other side of this is what must the other person do to make this contract work? You know, it's a partnership, isn't it? You might need them to create something, you might need them to send something. What is it? Because an awful lot of clients don't understand, particularly in social media, what they have to participate in, what they have to send.
Yeah.
And from where I sit, working with hundreds of social media managers across the world, I have to tell you that every single one of them goes, it always works like this. And I can think of at least 5 different kinds of always they've explained to me after that statement.
Yeah, because you know many different points of views there.
And then they get really cross with the customer because the customer hasn't guessed which kind of always they've got. So my really strong advice to you is to use that form to work it out and make sure you're communicating this, which is why it's a download for you to take away and use as you go through time. It's not just for today.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
And you've also got a must not have section. What must you not do and what must they not do to make this work? So with a customer, it could be, could you not change the brief 11 times in a week? But with you, are there things you mustn't do in order to make it work?
Mustn't.
So you've got what you must do, but you've also got what must you not do?
Would we, for example, not make grammar mistakes or these kind of things belong here?
Could be, or it could be in social media. It could be. It depends on the client, because some people have a branding and a style brief and a voice brief and customer avatars, and they obviously want you to be on message. So if you suddenly go off and write completely random different stuff, it's a problem. Other people rely on their social media manager to effectively generate that, not in the formal way agencies do, but because they don't know it's needed, they haven't done it. And
Yeah.
so to a degree, they're looking for you to be better than the team that came before, maybe, but they're not looking for such a tight adherence to branding and voice, you know?
Yeah.
Very, very different briefs, by the way, and worth bottoming out. And then the final thing on this section is about who owns what when the job's done. Do you remember we were talking about that in a kind of overview way? Because what happens, for example, if you do a 3-month contract with someone and they use your social media pictures and words for the next 10 years, are you thrilled that they loved it so much that you're still in there, or are you fed up that they're using your stuff for 10 years and that only paid you for 3 months?
I personally think that once you create a post for a client, it's kind of theirs. But like if they can give a some kind of tag that you created this, but I would say it's okay if they use it.
Many social media say that. Others get really upset if it's used after they're gone, you know.
Oh, okay.
But what we tend to write into our contracts is, but if you never paid us for it, that is definitely not okay.
Yeah.
Because not everybody pays their bills.
Yeah. No, definitely not in that case.
But that is worth considering. Where do you stand on this? And what about the work you created? Does the client have the exclusive right to use it when you're no longer working with them? In other words, they can use it and no one else? Or do they just have a right to use it, but you can repurpose it and use it for something else?
That's a good point. Depends, of course, on exactly the work, but it's just nowadays templates and all these are just, yeah, I think I would love the right to repurpose something, and of course without using their credentials, maybe use it somewhere else.
So that you need to be clear about, you know, because assumptions about rights are some of the biggest areas for arguments I've ever come across in business after assumptions about money.
Okay.
And to a degree, it's up to you, because if you sell a contract on this is the deal, this is the deal. If nobody likes your deal, they're going to let you know soon enough.
Yeah.
But if you think you've got a deal that's not in writing, you haven't got it.
Sorry, Annabel, it's Celine here. I just need to ask a question.
Please do.
In what you're explaining about social media, how does it apply to other examples like website design or even creative writing?
Web design or what?
Creative writing, like somebody
Creative
who writes
writing.
blog posts or creates
well, let's start
articles
with
for
website
magazines.
design. There are two major business models in website design, and again, everybody in one thinks it's the only one, which takes me on to assumptions are normal for your industry on my little download for you. So the question is, what do you expect to do or not to do without anyone actually bothering to discuss this in detail? And with web design in particular, this is a nightmare, because many people do relatively cheap website design, but the client is in effect renting the website. Every update, every change comes through that web designer, and they don't make their money at the creation stage. They make it in effect at the rental stage. And those web designers set up websites where they create, they mark the domain, they own the master login, and the customer is in effect like a tenant renting an apartment as opposed to the freeholder. The other half of the website industry create websites that the customer owns. They're given the master domain, the master logon. They normally charge more for the website design, but the customer is free to pay that website designer to do more designers at a later stage, do it themselves, or give it to someone else. The arguments between customers and website designers are almost always caused by the customer thinking they've got one and the website designer being the other. So it's really important for website designers to be clear about who owns what, who contracts at what level, particularly when you have to deal with websites that handle personal data for European citizens, which would mean that we would also have to deal with GDPR. So that's a big clash in website design. Now, in creative writing, again, the issue is of rights. So I'm using a copywriter at the moment to write some material for an exhibition I'm doing, and she always assigns complete copyright in her work once it's paid for, but it's no use to her because she doesn't want to do an exhibition for Coffee Clutch. It has no function for her other than selling it to me. But other creative writers might more generic stuff, and they might give me a license to use it because I've paid them, but they would retain the license to use it again themselves so they could modify it and use it in other circumstances. So it's really important when you're creating things out of your mind, out of your visual skills, all these intellectual property rights, that you are very clear with yourself about whether you're giving someone the right to use something, which is very different from the exclusive ownership of it, which would stop you from using it. Does that make sense to you, Salim?
So just to clarify, so let's say I wrote an article on travel.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say travel to Valencia, Spain. And I actually wrote it for a client who has a travel blog post thing, or travel article, or travel website, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So after that point, they then have complete use of this article. I can't take parts of it that I did research for because I didn't have a particular contract with them.
Actually, it's kind of round the other way in most countries in the world, but not all. If you are an employee, everything you write belongs to the organisation you're an employee of. But if you are an independent business, everything you write belongs to you unless you assigned it to the client. Right? Those are the legal defaults. However, within various industries, there are expectations about what's assigned. And one of the problems is, of course, that the expectations, as we've discussed in other areas, are not shared. So you could assign copyright to your client, which means you could never use any part of that work again because they would own it. You could assign them a license to use it, which means they could use it, but you could also use it. Obviously, you wouldn't expect to use it word for a rival because that would be unprofessional. But you need to decide what your business model is. Generally speaking, people who assign copyright, which means that the client can use it and you can never use it again, charge more for their services than people who assign a license, because the people who assign a license can recycle that product elsewhere.
Okay.
But it's not compulsory. You can give more and charge less. You know, it's not a law.
So it's called assign a license, okay?
Yeah, and assigning a license to use is like saying somebody can rent my apartment, which is very different from selling the apartment to them, in which case you can't go in, can you?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And you need, if you're in the creative industries, to understand what your business model is in relation to intellectual property rights and copyright. Bearing in mind that as tiny creatures, we can't afford to sue people every time they infringe our copyright. So we normally only retain copyright, you know, in things that we need. Because otherwise we just make the lawyers really rich, don't we?
Exactly.
You know,
So,
but you need to think about that. And for example, as a social media manager, you might have created a method of generating variations on a post. And you would always want to keep that method yours, even if it was documented in some way, because that's your superpower. Or as a web designer, you might have an amazing way of populating a website faster than anyone else. You would never want to assign that. But the results of that to that customer, you're never going to design a website that looks exactly like that for someone else. You normally would assign. Does that make sense?
It does.
Because you don't want my website. It doesn't do you any good. So these are the things also you need to talk about in this workbook on assumptions, what's normal for your industry, because you'll find out fairly quickly when you talk to other people in your industry that actually there's often more than one kind of normal. And you need to explore that, because what's normal should correlate to the type of business model you're operating. And generally speaking, the more you charge, the more you assign.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah. So, you know, don't give away the whole house for a price of a cup of coffee, you know. But then there are customers who expect that. But then, you know, the over needy, greedy customer is a thing, isn't it? So it's also worth thinking about legal and tax. You know, what country, state tax and legal system do you want to apply? And are you going to be charging or withholding tax? And if so, what? It's a very good question, because that might vary contract to contract as you go around the world. For example, in the UK, we charge VAT on services that are provided in the UK. But if they're provided when we're overseas, we don't have to, which for the digital nomads a nightmare, because you'll be in a different country every 4 days. You know, in fact, our whole legal and tax system globally hasn't caught up with digital nomads, because it thinks we're all staying in the same place for years at a stretch. And what about payment terms? Are you expecting to be paid in advance, in arrears, in stage payments? And what happens if you've got stage payments and they stop paying stage 2? Are you going to stop doing stage 3's work until stage 2's money's in? What's the deal? So these are really important things to be clear when you're contracting with people, whether you're buying or selling. Are their expectations the same as you? And micro businesses are terrible about this. I have about 7 or 9 VAs on my team at the moment, doing everything from web design to events management, whatever. And we have a very simple system that twice a month we sit down on a Tuesday and we pay all the bills we owe on the Friday, which gives a bit of time in case I muck it up. And that's it. And if your invoice isn't in my inbox by 8 a.m. on that Tuesday, you'll wait 2 weeks for the next run. Is that clear?
That's a good system.
Right, I can't tell you how many VAs invoice me on the Wednesday and say, why have I got to wait until the run after that? And I say, because you missed Tuesday. And they go, but the payment doesn't go till Friday. And I go, but I sit down with my co-director and we do all the finance on Tuesday. That's it. The rest of the week, we're writing contracts, right, with clients, doing events. We can't run about deciding to do an invoice payment every time someone in the world decides to send us an invoice. Most of my VAs get that totally. But every year I get a couple who go, but you took 23 days to pay me. And it's like, yep. And I could have paid you in 4 if you'd followed the system. Lots of micropreneurs are so focused on I do the work, and then at the weekend when I've got time, I'll do the billing, that you miss your clients' payment cycles. Particularly if you're billing really big corporates, this can cost you 3 months of waiting for your money. So you really need to be clear about what are they expecting you to do. Because if there's a cut point in the month and you need to get your invoice in by the 15th, get it in by the 15th. I've one lovely VA works for me, and I say to her, you never get paid on the mid-month run, you always get the month after. So you're the slowest person on my team to get paid. And it's because you always do your invoices for like July, you do on the 10th of August. So by the time you've got it and put it through, you get paid last Friday in August. You could have been paid first Friday in August. Why? And so that's just what I do. But although it's just what she does, she doesn't like waiting for her money. But if she could only bring herself to invoice on the Friday instead of the Monday, she'd be paid a month earlier. But she cannot adapt what she does. I have no idea why, by the way, but, you know, it's been going on for years. She just has a thing. But a lot of micropreneurs, when we deal with bigger organizations, that's what we do. But you need to find out what do they do, because getting paid is a really big thing about being in business. In fact, I go so far as to say if you're not getting paid, you won't be in business very long. And we tend to treat it as an afterthought. We put all that work into sales and marketing. We put all that work into making sure we're good at what we do, and we do the work, and then we bang off an invoice any old time, any old how, and hope for the best, and then complain that we've not been paid. That's really important to be clear about what the payment systems are. And similarly, what are you doing about professional indemnity insurance or other things in that quadrant? Because an awful lot of businesses carry professional indemnity insurance, but what's the level of cover that you've got? Because if you do with bigger corporates, some of them will say you need $5 million worth of public liability insurance, blah, blah, blah. Are you going to pay for that out of the fee you just quoted when you thought that the deal was you didn't have to pay it, you didn't have to have any? You need to be really clear about that, because professional indemnity cover can be expensive. So if you quoted a really cheap job and they said, great, we've got it, we love the numbers, we love the timetable, but before we get going, you need $5 million worth of insurance cover, and you go to your broker and they go, that's $200. That's off the bottom line of the fee you already quoted, unless you make it clear that's not the case.
Annabelle, about that, how important is indemnity insurance when you're starting out?
You know, it's a really difficult question, because anything that takes money off between your customer and the paying you and the bottom line hurts, doesn't it? It really hurts. But if you get in the habit of not carrying it and pricing yourself as not carrying it, if a customer comes to you and says, well, you caused me harm and you owe me money, how are you going to defend yourself? What are you going to use to pay the lawyers? So to a degree, I think it's almost impossible as a very, very new startup to get economic professional indemnity insurance. But I think in year 2 and year 3, you really should be pricing yourself so that you've got the slack in your business to do it. And ideally, if I could wave a magic financial wand, I'd have it from day one. We get ours cheaper than many because we carry a relatively high excess, you know, that the amount you have to pay yourself.
Right.
So we insure for disasters, not day-to-day hiccups, because we take the view we can handle the day-to-day hiccups. It's disasters that worry us. So there are ways to get it cheaper if you know what you're doing. But it does worry me how many people who are sole traders don't understand that if something goes wrong and the client sues them, their house, their car, everything they personally own is on the line, because there's nothing between them and that situation.
So I'm sure that the ladies that have joined us today can't even picture what they could get sued for. So if you could give a couple of examples, one for websites, one for social media, and one for creative writing.
Okay, well, social media, we were talking about that earlier in the thing. Supposing you've scheduled a massive campaign and something happens in the world, as COVID just did, or the venue burns down, or maybe there's a big scandal around some key person that you're referencing in your stuff, and the client gets hold of you, as they do, bless them, at 3 a.m. and says, take that stuff down. And you're having your digital nomad life or just the weekend off with the kids, and you don't see that email until Monday. And in that time, maybe 20 pre-scheduled posts have gone out, and the client gets hold of you and says, you've damaged my business. I told you to take that down. Now I've got customers cancelling. I've got people threatening to sue me, and it's all your fault because you didn't take that down when I told you to. Now, it might not be your fault. You might be able to mount a very successful defense that actually who reads their emails at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning. But that's going to cost you money. And as you have a lovely American accent, do I need to tell you how expensive lawyers are? So it could cost you $20,000, $100,000 to be right and to go to court and show that person that it wasn't your bad. So professional indemnity insurance isn't just about when it is your fault. It's about giving enough money in your back pocket to show that it wasn't. Now, I have a client who runs a online retail outfit in Chicago, and they've just had someone who makes a living out of shaking down middle-sized businesses across America walk into their store and go, even though the stuff was made in England and the contract was made in England, you should have been paying Chicago retail tax here. And unless you give me $100,000, I'm going to report you to the authorities. Now, my client's German board would never respond positive to such a shakedown, so they said try it. So they've now got a $6 million back tax suit, which they believe they can successfully fight off. But guess what the legal fees have been so far? So without proper insurance, they couldn't even defend themselves. They just have to do that. So for a web designer, it could be that your site perhaps isn't properly set up. We have a lot of fuss now around data privacy, around phishing and hacking, and you may have, as a web designer, accepted a brief to produce a website that is, shall we say, reasonably secure to industry standards. But something's gone wrong and someone's got into that site and they've done terrible things and it's damaged your client's reputation. They will come to you and say, it's your fault, you didn't design the site properly. No doubt you'll go to them and go, it's your fault, you shouldn't have shared your password with every Tom, Dick and Harry. But if your client is wealthier than you and has got longer pockets, their lawyers will give you a really hard time and you're going to have to fund your lawyers. Because professional indemnity insurance is not just for people who do it wrong, it's for people who do it right, who need to demonstrate they've done it right in the face of quite an aggressive assertion they haven't. So I'm not quite sure about creative writing, because in theory, the client should have signed off on the copy. But if for some reason you've written copy that you're authorized to publish, and you do, or you've bypassed the client sign-off process, and I have had one instance of that in the last couple of years, and that copy damages the client's business, because just putting up stuff that's not authorized wouldn't necessarily, you could find yourself in the firing line. All of these things are rare, but they're a bit like getting a major illness. They're rare, but extremely expensive when they happen. Does that make sense?
When you're talking about clients signing off on something, because now everybody seems to be working online, I'm assuming that digital signatures are valid.
In most jurisdictions, they are. Again, it depends what legal system you're working in.
Okay.
But most they are, most. But it's always a good idea to check. They are in the UK, and I think they may be in most of the USA. But that's why I always want to know what country are we in? What state are we in? America's brilliant because you do everything differently all over the place.
Yeah, Canada for sure, they allow digital signatures.
Yes. So I think most countries do, and all countries will. But obviously, again, you need to have a proper record of that digital signature.
Mm-hmm.
I use things like HelloSign and Adobe Sign, and I keep libraries of all the contracts you've ever signed with anyone that the person who signed it doesn't have access to. One of the things I counsel my clients against is letting the other party have the only signed copy, because you'd be amazed how often it disappears when things go wrong.
Yes, always take full control of all the paperwork.
Absolutely. But people send them off and they go and the client signed it, and then they don't remember where they put it, and the client's got the only copy. And if the client's in the wrong, the contract becomes invisible. It's amazing. And similarly with suppliers, you need to be able to lay your hands on these things, not because you live your daily business life thinking, I'm going to sue everyone or everyone's going to sue me. We're not there. We're in a space of, I want to do a great job. I want to get paid. I want everyone to love what I do. I want the people I pay to do a great job, of course. But every now and then life throws us a wobbly and it doesn't work out that way. And on that day, you need your contract. And you need it, by the way, not just to sue everybody, but to avoid it. In our coffee clutch support groups for people who use our contracts, we get regular things from people going, the client won't do this, or the person I'm paying won't do that. And I go, okay, just send them this note again. Have a little look at paragraph 9. I think you really do need to do this. 9 times out of 10, that resolves the problem, because people don't remember what they agreed to do. But the 10th time, your professional liability is really useful.
Hi, it's Lily. I have a question. To your point about sign off, when you, let's say I have created content for the client's blog article, did the research, and he or she has signed off on it, but signed off in the sense that they send an email and said, this is great. Yes, this is what I want. We can go ahead with the post. That's all you would need as a sign off then, right?
Yeah, but don't lose it, because
Yes, of
what
course.
some people do is they just leave it drifting about their inbox. You know, have a folder you keep them in.
Yes. Yeah.
And also, unless it's last
PDF it. I
minute,
PDF it and I put it in a folder. That's,
yeah, keep it somewhere you've got access to where it can't be changed or lost or whatever. And
yes.
also be aware of, I mean, I'm one of those people that I sometimes say to people, I think that's great, and then I'll think about it an hour later and I go, hang on a minute though, there's one thing I want to change, because I do seem to be incapable of thinking of that one thing at the same time. So people with me, they leave me an extra couple of hours to go, is it still great? And then they do it. Because I seem to have a kind of au fond de l'escalier problem, that I go, oh, I love it, and then I think about it and I go, but could you just change one word, you know? So you would know your customer, but if they always do that, you need to wait a little bit of time after the sign off before you upload it, because you know how they are.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And Lily, actually what I do is I create a PDF and then send it off for actual signature using Adobe eSign.
Okay.
That's on every single document, and then they all stay in a folder, even if it's just content.
It's useful to do if you've got the workflow set up for it, because of course some people are very happy in Adobe and some people struggle with it. It seems to be one of those platforms that divide people, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think Adobe could do something about that. I mean, I can get stuff eSign, but if it's any more complicated than that, I get someone else to set it up. But yeah, it's important to have a traceable record, and that also goes into your contracting. For example, when we're getting to the end of this workbook, you will be happy to hear, but there can be stuff that's specific to what you're doing. There can be data privacy requirements, there can be anti-money laundering requirements. It depends exactly what you're doing, what additional things need to be taken care of. But you do need to make sure that you contract properly and are clear about that. For example, if you're designing a website, who's responsible for ensuring data privacy requirements are met? And I can tell you now, when I work with web designers, they go the client. And when I work with the client, they go the web designer. There are big assumptions in that area about legal compliance of web design. Most web designers will do a certain amount of it to be helpful, but they don't want the final responsibility for checking it.
Mm-hmm.
And quite rightly so, because cybersecurity and data privacy is a different discipline to website design, any more than you'd expect your bookkeeper to do a global audit.
Exactly.
You know, but the customer often thinks it's all the same thing, so you need to be clear. And again, if you're dealing with financial transactions across borders, which I don't think you'll be doing as a web designer, or as a social media manager, but some VAs do, you need anti-money laundering stuff sorted out. There's all sorts of specifics to how you're doing what you're doing that don't affect everyone, but that doesn't mean no one's ever affected, that you need to be clear about if you're in that space. But if you're in that space, you should know it, hopefully. I mean, we have a lot of rules in the UK this year. We're in transition about writing websites that are for children that now have to be complied with. So if you're designing for a British or an EU company, a website that's designed for people under 18 to use, you've got a whole new set of compliance to deal with. Whose job is it that is done correctly? Because the web designer can make the site look pretty, but how can they know if it's ticking the right boxes for under 18s? And there's a big difference, by the way, between sort of 17 and 12 in terms of what's expected and required.
I wasn't aware of that.
Well, it came in with GDPR in 2018, but they've been a long time creating the standards. And the UK has just gone into, as of, I can't remember if it's August or September, a 1-year transition where the standards are in, but we're getting used to it. And I believe most of the rest of the EU is working along similar lines. And I always think, I mean, you know, we're leaving the EU in the UK anyway, but because the EU standards are the strictest, you have two choices when you trade globally. You either meet the strictest standards and then you don't worry about standards in other countries, or you stay at the bottom end of standards, and then every time you have to do something in another country, you have to change what you do. And I find it easier to work to the strictest standards, and then I know I don't have to worry about much.
Exactly.
Just depends, I guess, what you do. I can't wake up every day and go, what country is this person in? Oh dear, I've got to do it differently. And that's the great thing about being a micropreneur in a global capability, isn't it? When you're in the virtual space, you can make those decisions and act accordingly. Whereas my great-great-grandmother could only work in her village, in her business, in the legal system that applied at the time. She didn't get a choice other than emigrate. But we get all those choices and can stay where we are if we want to. I think that's exciting. Lots of people think it's daunting. I suppose it depends how you feel.
For me, it's exciting because of all the possibilities.
Yeah, I love the possibilities. So that is what Coffee Klatch's space is about, really, because you don't have a global corporate compliance department. You don't have a global legal department if you're a micropreneur. And the truth is, you can never afford it. You know, one global compliance lawyer is $250,000 a year. You're not going to have a team, are you?
Mm-hmm.
No. So, but if we all share what we know and we share the resources, we can put stuff together that suits most of the people most of the time. And then the few people it doesn't, you can say, well, actually, that really is tricky. Now you need to go spend that money on the corporate lawyer, if there's enough money in what you're doing to merit it, because that's like way above everyone else's pay grade. We get about 3 a year of those, by the way, where you think, well, that's lovely, but that's, you know, £25,000 worth of legal fees to sort that one out.
Wow.
Well, with some businesses, it's worth it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So that little workbook, I hope you can download and use as like a little checklist every time you're getting into a contractual relationship with someone, because regardless of that contractual relationships, those are the bare minimum things you need to be clear about. I'm not saying there isn't more, but life is short and we can't worry about everything all the time, can we? So that is the bare minimum.
Could you go over then also the group type of contract where for a specific project, several contractors get together to share their expertise? How does that really work?
Well, there are a number of ways it can work. And again, this is useful to go through as a checklist because you need to know who's going to own what at the end and who's going to get paid what. So one way to deal with it is to have a lead contractor and everyone else subcontracts with them. And I would have said that is the commonest form. Because for a one-off project, you're not going to form a cooperative or a new structure or a formal joint venture, because by the time you've done all that, you'll have finished the project. So the commonest way this is done is for someone to be the lead contractor, possibly the person doing the early stages of whatever it is, and to subcontract or outsource the other elements to the other people.
And so that contract is the one that you had shared with me on the Facebook group for the global, I forgot the title now.
Okay, we do both. So we do what we call terms of business, are the contracts you give to your customer.
Yes.
These are the terms on which you do business. We also have hiring agreements, which are the other way around. So this is the terms on which you're buying services from other people. So if you think of the terms of business as your sales terms and the hiring as your purchase terms, which is the way big corporates do it, they line up with each other, because obviously it's very important that if you're sending a client X, that you've bought it from the person you're paying, because otherwise that's called fraud if you're selling what you don't own, you know. So they all line up with each other, but they line up for, so we have team hiring contracts that mirror, but in a slightly different way, the things you sell. Then we have a UK range and a global range. And the global range is where at least one of the parties to that contract is not in the UK. So the global range is a slightly more complicated series of options in it, because you could be inside the EU globally, one in and one out of the EU globally. Neither of you ever been anywhere near the EU globally. So there are more if this then that's in the global range than there are in the UK range, when I think we finally sorted out whether we are or are not in the EU. But that took quite some time, by the way. But so the idea is that you would do a terms of business with the client. For example, you might be a web designer, and you would say, well, there's also going to be digital marketing, so you'd add that on, social media marketing, add that on, maybe copywriting. But you're the web designer, but you would then have a team hiring contract with the social media person who was going to do it, another one with the digital marketing person, maybe with a copywriter, so that everything you're buying in is streamlined with what you're selling out. But you're not obliged to sell all of them or buy all of them. We call it add-ons now. We do a lot of them where we have a core contract which reflects what you normally do, and around that you add on. I don't think of them as pivots or lane changes, though I know that's the jargon, but you normally only work successfully when you change lanes if you change into a lane where you already have standing and credibility. So normally it's a lane related to what you're already good at. You know, because if I suddenly decided I wanted to be a supermodel, I'd be in difficulty. You know, it's all very well changing lanes, but it's still not going to happen. So we see web designers getting into digital marketing and social media management, normally through associates and teams. We see digital marketers suddenly get into web design, but we don't see them suddenly taking up bookkeeping.
So
because it doesn't work for them, you know, it's not related. So the add-ons are designed to help you go a little bit wider and build a bigger team around your core expertise, so you can contract a bigger project, really.
So this is called the terms of business, and then the other one is called?
The hiring agreements. So this is what I have learned about it. Agree really clear signals with the people you work with for how you're going to say this is going wrong. Do not go away, feel really worried, then get really angry and then have an argument. Have a little signal. Now, I used to have two team members years ago who were brilliant, but they couldn't work with each other. They were like two dogs, you know, always snarling and fighting. And each one of them would come to me and go, the other one's been terrible to me. It was like having kids at home during lockdown, you know. And in the end, I gave them Post-it notes. And I said to them, when the other one irritates you or does something you think is really stupid, don't take it up then and now and come and bother me because I can't get any work done. Put a Post-it note on them. And when the other one did it the other way. So the first few days, they were like Christmas trees. They had so many Post-it notes on. They were all multicolored. They were quite pretty. The rest of us found it quite aesthetically pleasing. And then at the end of the day, I would make them reconcile their Post-it notes and go, why did you put that note there? What were you thinking? And then the other one would go, that's not what I was thinking. And over time, we got it down to 3 Post-it notes each a month. You know, we never got them to really work happily together because they were too... Well, from where I sat, they were both too weird, but don't ever tell them that was my conclusion on it. But we reduced the stress by reducing the desire to instantly respond or harbour it forever and never get over it. So agree some clear signal. It doesn't have to be a Post-it note. But what are you going to do when you're collaborating with your lovely interns all working together and you're not sure about this? Doesn't have to be something nasty, could be a Post-it note, but have a signal that everyone knows if you say this, it's like time out, we need to think. I have a co-director who hates to make decisions rapidly. So if I make him make a decision in a meeting, always makes the opposite decision the next day and gets really cross. So he's learned to say to me, I will give you a decision on Friday. The thing he hasn't learned, by the way, is to actually turn up with one on Friday, but we're working on that bit. You know, collaboration is an art as much as a science. Create a space for conversations with your team that are not just about the project in hand. Right, because we get so task focused when you're making money. I don't mean just hang out and gossip all the time and don't do any work, but Coffee Clatch was created around a coffee pot, which, by the way, wasn't working properly and took forever to make coffee. And if we hadn't had that space for conversations, we wouldn't be doing today what we're doing. So make sure you're not all about tasks and deadlines. You've got something else going on. We've talked about it with externally, but internally, respect people's time boundaries and priorities. If the person you're dealing with is in charge of websites and they've got to get a website up by 4 o'clock today, this is not the moment to use the conversation space to go, oh, I've always been wondering. Be gentle to each other because we all get so tangled up. Be very clear about payment, who gets paid what the terms are, what's going on, because nothing spoils a really high functioning collaboration team than arguments about, well, I was expecting some money and I never got any. Be very clear within your team, just as you are with customers, about what is extra. If you're thinking, if the rest of the team want me to do proofreading and I want to charge for it, be very clear that that is something you charge for that is extra to what you set off on. Save so many arguments. Some of the most successful business women in the world have really detailed menus of what they charge extra for. Some of the brokest women I know feel it's somehow all in and somehow it's okay and somehow it come out in the wash. Creates a lot of team tension down the road. Find yourself a business mentor. Well, that's easy. You've got one, haven't you? You know, but lots of people haven't. Don't try and figure this all out on your own because you will make your head explode. And never send angry or junk mail to your colleagues, your collaborators, or your customers. Right? If you're that angry that you want to tell them and it ends in off, go for a walk, answer it tomorrow, talk to your mum about it, go back to your mentor. Never, never, never respond to people when you're feeling really provoked, because even the best collaborators can be irritating. Shh, don't tell them. They can be really irritating, and you don't ever want to make long-term decisions about what you're doing with whom from that space. These are really important things. Every one of these has cost me thousands of pounds to learn because I didn't know it. Make sure your contracts that you have reflect the way you work. You know, don't get something in Latin from some bloke that's never heard of your industry and then contract to it. I see contracts every day that are promises between two people that neither of them could keep because neither of them knew what it meant. This doesn't help for being a good collaborator. Remember, your team has a life too. The project's important, success is important, but they've got family, friends, dogs, cats, kids to go home to, and you have to let them have that life, because if you all work and don't have a life to go home to, you become those weird people they do documentaries about. And build yourself a really great team and a really great business, and take time to celebrate all these little steps on the way, because when you look back, you will never go, I signed a brilliant contract, but you will go, we did a brilliant piece of work and look what we did. And remember, that is the point, Rosie. Are you ready? Because you know the whole point of this is to help you, look, get your ducks in a row.
Oh, love it.
Love it.
And those ducks, they go walkabouts, darling, trust me. But if you've got a plan, and the team contracts are on the team page, by the way, and easily found, and I think I must have realised I hadn't made that quite clear, you can do this thing. You guys are going to be amazing. There's a whole generation of new entrepreneurs coming out who are going to show us old entrepreneurs a thing or two, I'm sure, you know. And you live in a different world. You have new technology, new possibilities, new ideas, new things to do I've never even heard of. I think it's amazing. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. Maria, did you have any questions at all? Because you were pretty quiet.
Because the law is still new for me, I took a peek about the contract workbook, and it seems I have to process more because there is some terms that I don't seem to understand.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I will
Get
reach.
back to me when you've read it. I'm sure we can reach each other via various avenues. And let me know what terms you don't understand. And if you still don't understand them when you've thought about them, I'll be very happy to help, Maria.
Thank you, Annabel.
You know, it's not easy, is it? Everything in life has jargon, and I'll be very happy to help you unravel it. Give it a couple of days thought and get back to me. I'll be back in Wi-Fi zone again at the end of next week, because when I come off this mooring down the valley, I'm out of signal.
Okay. Well, thank you again. It was wonderful. I'm sure everyone really appreciated your time and that we all learned a lot.
I hope you learned
Yes.
something. Try not to get overwhelmed by it, darlings. People will always do the strangest things, and contracts are like the high road you try and keep everybody on, you know, but we all wander off. That's the nature of being alive, isn't it?
Mm.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, ladies. And come back to me if you're still confused. We'll sort it out.
Thank
you so
you.
much, Annabelle.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.